Thank you very, very much. I'm sure a lot of people will rest assured that the 7th licensing round is soon over. But let's not talk about that. Rather, I'd pick on a point, because you were very kind to the industry. You referred to the year 2013, where contributions from these people to the state coffers were, I think you used the figure 22 billion Danish, which is a substantial amount, as you say, in these quarters. But then, as you know better than I, since then, the contribution has basically halved. It's down by 50%, and further drops are available or expected.
Well, we don't have the new figures yet.
No, I know that. But you know the figures better than I do, and you're not correcting me very much right now, but it's going down very, very quickly.
It's going down.
And somehow, I'm wondering, how will that change the priorities of your agency?
It won't change the priorities of the agency. I don't think we can say a half from 13 to 14, but it's dropping, and this has been in the cards for many years. We see a declining production. That is the whole idea behind the strategy work, is basically to say, we had the tax reform a few years ago. Now we look at all other elements and certainly trying to bring down costs, make for a more efficient recovery activity.
But certainly, when a government agency realizes that the industry you're regulating is dropping in fiscal importance at a rate that we're looking at right now, it must somehow also make it more difficult to make decisions on further government investments, incentives, support for R&D, etc.
Well, I think the sector is doing a lot in R&D already. With the new center, that is a key pillar going forward. As I already mentioned, the strategy work is going to lay out a number of things that we can do together to probably ramp up production in the years to come. But we can't change the nature of the Danish sector. So given this, and the increased speed with which we're opening licensing round, we're going to do that 1 year after this licensing round has closed. We're going to open the next one, and so forth. I think there are a number of things we can do, and I think we're just about reaching sort of the finish line in the strategy work. And I think I'm very sorry that we can't come out with the conclusions today. The first
that would have been nice.
But that would have been very nice, because then I'd be able to give you more concrete answers, Martin, to your question. But I think there's a lot in the pipeline, and so to answer your first question again, our priorities are not changing.
But certainly, I mean, it cannot be true that a government agency does not change its view on the industry and how much to invest in it, time, money, resources, when that industry is simply dropping in significance.
It's not dropping in significant, but it's going through rough waters, and it's going through hard times, and it's experiencing some changing conditions. But I think the agency is, in this sense, an extension of the government's policy. And I would say this current government has a very, very strong focus on oil and gas production, making sure that we squeeze as much out of the North Sea as we can in socio-economic beneficial terms.
Is that a stronger focus than the previous government?
I wouldn't say.
I thought so.
But I will only conclude that this government has a very strong focus.
Anyway, you talked about the potentials in the North Sea. And I think a lot of people here are very much aware of that potential. There's been a lot of writings and talks and analysis done on that. I think you will all agree that there's great potential out there. It's very expensive and costly and difficult to get it up, as you rightly said. That potential, can that be exploited at the current level of returns?
That's a very good question. Some of it can. Other parts won't be able to be recovered at the current return levels. But I think that is also what the strategy work will prove. when we come out with the conclusions, is that there are some things we can do within the current regulatory framework. And I think, as I tried to say in my speech, huddling up, cooperating more, opening up perspectives on how you can actually achieve your goals together is a great part of the equation. But of course, there are other parts to this. Reaching marginal fields is not only about huddling up, it's also about the tax regime and so forth. But as it stands right now, we are not in a position where we can open up tax discussions again.
Why not?
That's a government decision. And the government does not have a formal position on that yet. It's a new government. Let government work its way through this.
Let's leave it at that. The floor is open. I remind you, I should have reminded you before, the floor is open. So if you raise your hands, one at a time, or one hand at a time, there will be a microphone available shortly for you. As you can see, I'm hard pressed to see all of you from here, but please raise your hand high in the air and you will have a microphone while I ask the next question, because you talk, and I think we will hear more about that today, collaboration, cooperation, etc. And you point to one sort of cooperation, third-party agreements. What will you do to encourage those?
Well, we're looking at the current infrastructure situation. We're looking at the pipelines reaching shore from the fields, and how we can actually structure that system in a way that makes sense to all parties out there. Mm-hmm. So that's one way. But some of this also has to be left with the companies engaged in the North Sea, because it's their infrastructure. And how you sort of reserve capacity on the platforms basically for various activities that can be available to third parties is another part of this.
But I think there is I always suspect that when heads of agencies mention sort of things in passing, that might be the most important thing to listen to. And third-party agreements, I think you think they're very important. Mm-hmm. Is that right?
Absolutely.
So what kind of incentives, what kind of backup will you provide?
For the third-party agreements? Well,
yes.
It's very clear. The regulation around third-party agreements is relatively clear. So it's not a matter of making regulation more transparent or more straightforward. I think it's a matter of using current regulation.
And what do you see as the most pressing barrier for more third-party agreements on the shelf?
I think it's the perspective of the companies engaged. I think there has historically been a perspective that has been more inward-looking, and I think, given where we are, and I think the industry alludes to this itself, given where we are in the production process in the North Sea, I think there is a need to change scope and change focus, basically.
And this is the responsibility of the executives of the oil companies that are present in this room?
Certainly to a large extent.
Thank you. They will be up here later. There is, you mentioned shortly, you pointed to the transition that the government, shifting governments have introduced in this country towards a greener economy, less reliance on oil and gas or in coal. What kind of effects will the current low oil prices have on this transition?
Various analyses point to various effects. My personal view is that it won't have a very large effect on the transition. Now we're jumping out of oil and gas, of course, but if we look at new capacity, Danish production capacity, power production capacity, lowest cost new installation is onshore wind. That doesn't have anything to do with the oil price. That's basically that's basically given by other factors in play economically. So I think it won't affect very dramatically the change to more to greener production capacities in our system.
So this whole shift in the oil industry, which is massive and could last for long, we will have expert opinions on that in a minute. will have basically no impact on how the agency, the politicians think on the transition in the years to come?
I think it's very important to if you look at the green transition or the green power production transition, basically, that is decoupled from oil and gas production, because what we use oil for is basically transport to a very large extent. And so transport is what we're still trying to grapple with in the energy transition process. And that is not something we have an answer for yet. And you can see with electric vehicles, it's not coming online very fast. So I think that is for the future. And so if you ask me at a time when electric vehicles were entering the stage at a dramatic pace, we might be in a different situation. But right now we're looking at power transition, we're looking at heating transition. And of course, in terms of heat, gas plays a central role, but oil doesn't anymore in Denmark.
The floor is open. There's one there, please. There's a microphone on its way.
My name is Jens Hofmark, and I represent the International Association of Drilling Contractors. I recall last year we heard from the Minister of Energy that he compared us to cholera, and that's despite the fact that we contribute with like 30% of the Danish tax revenues. I understand the new Danish government is looking milder at the industry. Would you, Morten, support that we get some incentives in this very difficult market? That was my question.
Thank you.
Well, I think he compared you to tuberculosis, actually. And I won't comment on the former government's positions. I think this government, the current government, has this industry's interests very much at heart. I know that we are, both within the strategy work and in general, looking at everything we can to increase incentives within the regulation that we're dealing with. But of course, if you're looking at tax and so forth, that's without my jurisdiction, outside my jurisdiction, so I can't comment on that directly.
It's out of your jurisdiction, certainly we all recognize that, but you've been dealing with politicians for a long time. You're better at reading them than we are, so please help out. What's the likely outcome of the deliberations that must be ongoing?
That's a very, very good question, Martin. And I'm not sure that I'm better at reading politicians than you are.
I'm sure you are. And you're also in a better position to say what likely areas are incentives for. That was badly put, but you know what I mean. There are a lot of options when you discuss the fiscal regime surrounding the oil and gas industry. From your work with the strategy, your work with politicians, which particular points, which particular areas of the industry would be likely objects for the discussions?
I won't answer that directly. But what I will say is that we're looking very much to the countries around the North Sea, to Norway, to the UK, looking at what these countries have done with their tax regimes, with their incentive schemes and so forth, trying to distill whichever conclusions we can from that, if we are at some point to increase incentives in Denmark.
And how lucky we are that both the Norwegians and the Brits are here. Mr. Beck, thank you very much for now. I'm very happy to announce that the head of the regulatory agency will stay here with us for a couple of hours more and take part in the discussions also from here on. Thank you very much.